It is 11:30 a.m. The Kursk submarine was a demonstration of cutting-edge designing and innovative ability, everybody treated as resilient, made out of a team that has little insight and is come up short on a boat loaded with sufficient capability to bring down a transporter armada. However, on the off chance that any blast and a second, a lot bigger blast, yet the Russian naval force didn't It is 11:30 a.m. Yet, the 118 men don't know anything about nightfall and daybreak as the dinky ocean encompasses them, as the as of late chosen President Vladimir Putin expressed Russia planned to show that her strong boats won't remain in port any longer, and to be sure the mightiest of all they K was wanted to partake in a maritime drill and afterwards sail across the Mediterranean Ocean. Little did everybody realize it could never at any point come to the Mediterranean. Kex was worked to be everything except stable, and after its development in 1994, it genuinely became quite possibly of the most dreaded maritime vessels. Made it was work to overcome a whole U.S. plane-carrying warship bunch all alone, and had the capacities to stay submerged for north of 120 days, and was intended to get through icy ice. The submarine could convey atomic warheads, numerous torpedoes, and rockets. The structure, which was comprised of high-nickel, high-chromium-tempered steel, was 30 feet longer than the first Oscar-class submarines, estimating 505 ft. She included modern hardware and was more nimble than the Oscar-A boats while staying significantly calmer. The plan of the Kursk submarine was a demonstration of cutting-edge designing and innovative ability. The submarine was one of the primary vessels finished after the unexpected breakdown of the Soviet Association, with a length of north of 554 m and a lowered removal of roughly 24,000 tons. The Kursk was an overwhelming vessel. Its twofold frame development gave both underlying strength and upgraded insurance. The external structure went about as a strong obstruction against outer tension, while the internal body housed different compartments and frameworks controlled by a compressed water reactor. The Kursk used atomic impetus, empowering it to work for expanded periods without refueling. Its combat hardware incorporated a variety of torpedoes and journey rockets with various torpedo tubes decisively situated in the bow and harsh segments. Vertical rocket launchers considered the terminating of voyage rockets, making the Kursk an imposing power in both surface and submerged fighting. Outfitted with cutting-edge sonar and sensor frameworks, the submarine flaunted bow-mounted and flank clusters for long-reach location and situational mindfulness. Its correspondence and order frameworks guaranteed compelling coordination with other maritime resources and war rooms, including secure channels to safeguard mission privacy. The outside body highlighted a tiny attractive mark, which implied that it could undoubtedly evade recognition by American submarines, which for the most part utilized attractive peculiarity identification or frantic frameworks. The plan of the Kursk addressed a combination of cutting-edge innovation, military capacity, and functional proficiency. It genuinely was the pride of Russian designing. The initiation of Kursk was a way for Russia, a recently shaped country, after the lamentable breakdown of the Soviet Association, to show its spot on the planet. It was a method for showing the Russian leagues proceeded with presence of maritime power. The making of the Kursk, quite possibly of the most progressive submarine, had a momentous effect on the world. The submarine was worked during a time of incredible international importance, with the Soviet Association imploding. The world was encountering a power vacuum. In these dubious conditions, Kursk turned into an image of force and responsibility of the Russian League to keep major areas of strength for and on the planet. By growing mechanically progressed military, even amidst political and conservative hardships, the developing desires of the Russian organization pushed NATO to screen the developing Russian military innovation and form more complete and severe security strategies. Adding to the grinding was the way that Kursk was at peace of the northern Russian armada, which played a huge part in guaranteeing Russia's developing advantages in the cold. The Kursk submarine was beyond question, quite possibly, of the most risky military weapon in mankind's set of experiences, constraining the world to examine issues like prevention, arms control, and oceanic. However, at that point, what prompted the apparently resilient and powerful submarine to wind up turning into the Russian organization's greatest bad dream? Before we can go into the Kursk catastrophe, we should rewind the clock a smidgen and discuss the Sidon. Blast the Sidon was an English maritime submarine and was a piece of the third gathering of S-class submarines, worked by Camelliad, and an organization the boat alongside most other English boats during the 1950s utilized HTP, or hydrogen peroxide, as the fundamental parts in their torpedoes. Anyway, hydrogen peroxide is very reactive, and the most minute misaki can prompt calamity, which was precisely exact thing occurred on account of the Sidon, when 13 men were stacking a defective torpedo made out of HTP, a blemish, making the HTP break and come into contact with the air made the torpedo detonate, killing every one of the 13 men on the spot, and, surprisingly, prompting the sinking of the Sidon. From there on out, the English bit by bit quit involving HTP in their torpedoes. 40 years after the fact, Russia confronted a deficiency of assets to satisfy its desires. The inclination to equal the becoming stronger of America was at pinnacle, and despite the fact that it had scratched by an adequate number of assets, only very narrowly, to make the stalwart that, at his KK, it actually required fuel torpedoes and team hydrogen peroxide, consequently turned into a cost-effective answer for the Russians' naval force, and was frequently utilized regardless of its dangers, because of low subsidies all the group on board the Kursk was come up short on, and many were not paid by any means further. Since fuel was costly, the Kursk was seldom conveyed for a mission, which prompted the greater part of the team being unpracticed and having minimal useful information. Despite the fact that KK was a tactical wonder, it ultimately turned into a risk on the shoulders of the Russian government supporting it monetarily, turning out to be increasingly hard as the day advanced. As a result of each of this, we currently have a boat that everybody treated as resilient, made out of a group that has little insight and is come up short on a boat loaded with sufficient capability to bring down a transporter armada, yet on the off chance that any of its weaponry is mistaken care of, it can blow up rapidly. This large number of variables, when taken together, implied that Kursk was pretty much a ticking bomb, and on 12th of August, the bomb went off. It was the day of August 12, 2000. The Kursk was partaking in a huge scope maritime practice in the fruitless ocean. This was the main maritime drill of the submarine in more than 10 years. It comprised of 30 boats and 3 submarines. During the activity, something strange happened. A sort 6,576 pack torpedo out of nowhere emitted in the bow compartment setting. Of a progression of horrendous occasions, it is accepted that the blast was because of unstable HTP leaking through a shortcoming weld in the torpedo packaging. This first blast caused the gas tank to break and cause a colossal fire which the group was not sufficiently experienced to manage. It is thought that as of now the team overreacted, and around 23 of the individuals went as distant from the fire as conceivable. That is, in the chamber. This fire in the long run spread to the remainder of the torpedoes, which set off a second and, surprisingly, more noteworthy blast. The subsequent blast is assessed to have been around 31.7 tons of dynamite and enrolled as 4.2 on the raw scale, the scale that is utilized to quantify tremors. It very well may be felt similar to the frozen north and was the second sign that something was off base, the main sign being the absence of correspondence between the Kursk and the remainder of the Russian naval force as the series of blasts unfurled the Kursk. immediately lost power and started sinking. The submarine at last stopped on the seabed. More discouraging than the deficiency of property was the existences of 118 group individuals who met their unfortunate destiny as they let completely go over their bodies because of wounds, suffocation and openness. In at first a couple of individuals endure, yet the sluggish reaction of Russian specialists immediately hampered their expectations as insight about the debacle spread. The Russian naval force started salvage activity. Anyway, beginning salvage endeavors were thwarted by an absence of data and deficient correspondence frameworks. The groups of neighboring boats felt an underlying blast and a second, a lot bigger blast. However, the Russian naval force didn't understand that a mishap had happened and didn't start a quest for the vessel for north of 6 hours. The submarine's crisis salvage kit had been purposefully crippled during an earlier mission, and it required over 16 hours to find the submarine, which laid on the sea floor at a profundity of 0 matter. Russian specialists were delayed to acknowledge worldwide help further, postponing the salvage endeavors. It required a few days for an English and Norwegian group to arrive at the scene. However, by then all desire for finding survivors had blurred. Everybody could look, as every single salvage endeavor fizzled until in the long run the English and Norwegian jumpers made the way for the tender chamber just to find 23 dead men. It is thought that they passed on from asphyxiation, or in layman terms, they kicked the bucket, suffocating gradually to death. Following the catastrophe, broad examinations were done to decide the reason for the blast and the disappointments in the salvage activity. The investigations featured a mix of elements, including the maturing condition of the submarine, unfortunate support, rehearses and lacking security conventions, the torpedo's shaky fuel, and the deficient reaction to the underlying blast were likewise distinguished as contributing variables. Something significant to note is that it was subsequently viewed that as the greater part of the directions on board the boat were not in any event for HTP torpedoes, yet rather for an alternate kind of torpedo through and through. Besides, over the group was not by any stretch educated about the risks regarding HTP torpedoes or prepared in taking care of a similar. This catastrophe uncovered the well-established issues inside the Armada, including lacking subsidizing, preparing, and upkeep, and it prompted such a public clamor that the Russian government had to defy the foundational issues tormenting its submarine armada, bringing about huge changes to somewhere safe and secure techniques, preparing projects and global participation, despite the fact that unfortunate support rehearses and insufficient security conventions appear to be a substantial justification for the mishap. Some contend that as a general rule, the KK submarine might have crashed into one more submarine, prompting the series of blasts that drove the submarine to at last sink. A few reports recommend acoustic irregularities and other strange submerged sounds nearby the quays at the hour of the occurrence, which, as indicated by some, are proof of impact anyway. This hypothesis needs proof and is many times dismissed, even by Russian authorities. Another hypothesis proposes that the sinking of Kursk is, as a matter of fact, man-made, as the submarine was likely undermined by somebody from the inside anyway. Authoritatively, the genuine purpose for the misfortune stays inadvertent torpedo blast, quite possibly of the most sad effect that the Kursk occurrence left a heritage for is the deficiency of lives of 118 blameless group individuals who had no clue prior to cruising for the maritime drill that it would be their last. They were come up short on, deceived and erroneously instructed about the risks and results of the HTP torpedoes. The most exceedingly terrible part, pretty much all of this, is if the Russian organization acted rapidly, a great deal of lives might have been saved. This was obviously a weighty misfortune for the Russian naval force, and its resolve the groups of the teammates likewise endured vigorously, and the occurrence generally sabotaged the influence of Russia on an international scale. The sheer absence of obligation showed by the Russian government drove men to lose trust over then-chosen Vladimir Putin. The episode invited analysis, both locally and globally, the misfortune. Additionally, uncovered critical weaknesses in the Russian naval forces' preparation gear and well-being conventions. The episode was generally quite possibly of the most horrendously awful maritime misfortune throughout the entire existence of humankind, yet it further developed Russian NATO relations, empowering the significance of straightforwardness and open correspondence between nations. Western countries further offered help and innovation, fortifying the relations. Further, the occurrence additionally drove Russia to make severe moves guaranteeing security of maritime instruments to forestall any glitch or mishaps. It prompted changes in the Russian naval force, including expanded speculation on preparing and hardware. The desires of Russian League finished with a calamity as the KSK episode uncovered their shortcomings, prompting a change in their picture and world governmental issues as a regard to the people who lost their lives in the mishap. President Putin marked a declaration granting request of fortitude to the whole team, and the commander of the submarine was granted with the title Legend of the Russian Organization. The KSK fiasco stays a sad section in submarine history, featuring the human expense of oceanic mishaps and the significance of focusing on well-being. The episode provoked a reassessment of security conventions and prompted huge changes inside the Russian naval force. While the actual misfortune was disastrous, it filled in as an impetus for change and expanded mindfulness about the dangers implied in submarine tasks. The illustrations gained from the Kursk catastrophe kept on molding submarine security rehearses, eventually meaning to keep comparative occurrences from happening in the future. The Kursk was an image of Russian could, with a practically fanciful notoriety, yet this occurrence simply demonstrates that regardless of how strong Kursk was, no measure of solidarity could save it from indiscreet administration and terrible choices. The Kursk's calamity filled in as a reminder for the worldwide submarine local area, featuring the innate risks and dangers related with working submarines. It underscored the significance of powerful security conventions, standard support, and viable correspondence frameworks. Thinking about that starting today, the Russian naval force is getting increasingly strong with it. Ongoing submarines like the Belgrade and Kirov, perhaps the Kursk debacle, while a tray prepared for future advancement. With that, I leave you.